Hey, what's up, everybody? John Odermatt here, host of Felony Friday. And did you know that we have a weekly show dedicated to sports and gambling and telling ridiculous stories? It's not a public show. It's behind our paywall in the Lions of Liberty Pride. It's called Degenerate Gamblers. It is myself and Brian McWilliams and the elusive legal counsel of the Lions of Liberty, Rico. And every week on Degenerate Gamblers, we review what's going on in college football, pro football. Maybe we talk a little bit of playoff baseball, not much though. But more importantly, we tell ridiculous stories from our daily lives and from our past. So in order to get access to that, you got to join the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty to get access.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday, a weekly show right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. And Felony Friday, if you don't know, now you know. It's focused on the criminal justice system. This week specifically, I'm really excited. We got a little bit different show, but a very entertaining show. If you're into true crime, if you're into hearing about the ins and outs of murder investigations, maybe entertaining is not the right word, captivating, fascinating. These stories obviously are very tragic, but I have a guest today who he's a former detective from Ireland, from across the pond, and he's written a book about the ins and outs of some of Ireland's most notorious crimes. So I'll introduce him in just a minute. You're gonna want to be able to check out his book and learn about him. Go to the show notes page at lionsofliberty.com/FF202. And like I always say, guys, Felony Friday, one of 3 shows on Lions of Liberty. There's 2 other shows. First one, every week on Monday, hosted by Mark Claire, where Mark interviews Liberty thought leaders. If you're like, what's libertarianism? What's this philosophy? What are these people thinking? Tune into Mark's show. Listen to his guests. They know a lot more than I do, or any of us do, about the principles of liberty. On Wednesday, we have a show hosted by Brian McWilliams. It's called Electric Liberty Land. It's focused on comedy, culture, and liberty. If you're sick and tired of just getting your current events from CNN or Fox News or crazy people on Twitter, then maybe try tuning into Brian's show, Electric Liberty Land, and he'll break down the current events and the news for you of every single week. And of course, Friday, this show, Felony Friday, you get all 3 for the price of nothing by subscribing on whatever podcast app is your favorite podcast app. I don't discriminate. Wherever you're listening to this show right now, just go subscribe, rate, review, rinse, repeat, tell your friends, share the show. That's all I got, guys. Let's get rolling with today's show. My guest today on Felony Friday is Pat Merry. Pat hails from across the Atlantic in Ireland. Pat is a former detective inspector with the An Garda Síochána. Over the course of his career, he was involved in the investigation of some of Ireland's most notorious murder cases. And he is the author of a book, an awesome book that is out now. It's called The Making of a Detective, a Garda's story of investigating some of Ireland's most notorious crimes. Pat, welcome to Felony Friday.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's great to connect with you. It's funny how we were able to come in contact. I don't know if it's funny, but it's interesting to me. Is one of my friends over here in the U.S., one of my coworkers, I won't use names, but got married to one of your friends over there in Ireland. So that's
correct. Yes, and we had a good wedding, and we had a good day of it. Yeah,
that's good to hear. And she mentioned your book to me, and I was like, well, that sounds like a very interesting guy to talk to. Interesting book, and it is. It's a fantastic book, and I got to say, you're a very good storyteller.
Oh, no, that's good. Thank you, John. Thank you. The book is number 4 bestseller in Ireland non-fiction at the moment, so it's doing well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And, obviously most of my guests here on the show are from the U.S. I'm based in the U.S., but you're not the first guest I've had on from across the pond here. I did interview probably more than a year ago Johan Hari, who was the author of Chasing the Scream, and also a former UK undercover detective, Neil Woods. And, I think it's good, for my listener base, who's a lot is obviously U.S., but hopefully we get some from Ireland. I think it's good to get a taste of the criminal justice system and how things work in every country.
Yes, indeed. Yes. We have, I've spent 33 years in An Garda Síochána, and I started off as a raw recruit and worked my way up and got a liking for investigations, and then was picked as a detective and became a detective. And then I was involved in some murder investigations, and I got promoted and moved up the line, and I eventually finished my career after 33 years as a detective inspector and as a fully trained senior investigating officer. Now, during the course of my career, I also qualified in scenes of crime, and I could examine scenes of murders or whatever. I was fully qualified in that as well. So it gave me a good base to be an investigator, because I knew and had dealt with other areas of, let's say, murders that gave me good insight before I became a detective inspector.
So I'm curious, what first got you interested in going down that path? Because if I'm remembering correctly from the book, you didn't have family, or you didn't have anyone that was, any mentors or anything like that had done this. What built that desire for you to follow this career?
Right. Well, it's funny. I have been the only policeman in my family going back a long number of years. And the reason I took an interest in it was, firstly and foremost, when I was a young child, I encountered a policeman in uniform on the street while I was sent to do some messages for my mother. And this policeman spoke to me and said, "Hello, young man, how are you?" And I was totally taken back by this man in a uniform, and he was a fine cut of a gentleman and spick and span, and I really was taken back by this person. I went home to my mother after doing the messages, and I was about 10 years of age, and I told her I'd met a policeman, and then she explained to me what a policeman does, and I was taken by the fact that these people were there to protect society and to look after good people and lock up the bad people, and I was sort of taken with that. But on top of that, my father had a friend who was in the police, and he used to call to our house, and he would be in uniform, and of course he would always be messing with me and put me in an arm lock, and then he'd put handcuffs on me and that type of thing, and he would let me see the baton that he had, and he'd let me wave it around. And so I was totally taken with this concept of what a policeman was. So when I mentioned this in my book, The Making of a Detective, when I was 17 years of age, I went to my local police station to fill out an application form to join the police, and the sergeant who was there got a hold of me and shook me and said, you're a bit thin, you need to put more meat on you, and also you need to be 18 years of age, not 17. So he sent me on my way, and I was obviously a little bit disappointed. But when I spent the next 7 years in the private sector, and I had worked initially in a carpet factory doing wages and been working on computers. Mm-hmm. And then I left that company and joined an American company called Union Camp, which dealt with, they were manufacturers of packaging, corrugated packaging. And I eventually worked my way into the design department there. And I think there's where my detective career began, believe it or not, in the private sector, because I was tasked in that job of having to come up with packaging solutions for companies that used corrugated packaging. So it meant that I had to go to companies who had automated machines and see what packaging requirements they needed. I would design the packaging for them and design it in such a fashion that it would be cost effective for them. Now, I became very good at that, and I had this train of thought of solving problems. So when I joined the Guards, I had still this mindset. And when I was in one of the stations, one of the first stations I was put, one of the first police stations I went to, I wanted to get into investigations, and the opportunity arose only because I worked hard as uniform policeman to solve crime, which I did, and I was brought up into what we call plainclothes detective work. Like, you're not a detective, you're just a plainclothes uniform guy, and you're helping out the detectives. But during the course of that period of time, there was some murders that occurred, and I was brought in on the investigations because I was a plainclothes member of the police, and I observed very intently all the aspects that goes on in a murder investigation and how it worked and how it operated, and the various stakeholders in the investigation team. And I was just totally taken with this phenomenon of solving murders. And one of the first murders that I was on, and it's in the book, a girl by the name of Marilyn Rinn, who went missing one Christmas, and her body was found in shrubbery, and she had been raped and strangled. And it was the first case in Ireland where DNA was used to solve the crime. So that was a huge case and a very well investigated. And I was part of that team, but I was only very young. I was junior. I was only learning the ropes. But from my experience as being in this private sector, working with the American company, I had developed the skill of looking for ways of solving problems. So I knew myself at that stage, this is what I really want to do. And I reckon I could do a good job. Now,
if I could come back for a minute to the DNA, because obviously, since that first introduction there in Ireland, I'm sure it's grown exponentially as it has here, the use of it in the United States.
Yes,
but there are drawbacks. There are some potential pitfalls and risks with the use of DNA. Correct? Can you elaborate on some of the benefits and some of the things that some of the areas that can be tricky while using it?
Well, what I would say in respect of DNA, not only does it help to prove guilt of someone, it also can be used to prove the innocence of people. So it's a very, very good tool in the toolbox of an investigator. However, we don't use it here in Ireland as much, but there's things called low copy DNA, which is used in the UK. And I believe it's not as, it's very hard to develop low copy DNA, and it's not as let's say, definitive as just your ordinary DNA, But like, so many crimes have been solved since the development of DNA. Like, it's phenomenal, really. But it's like every piece of evidence; it has to be evaluated and represented and shown that that evidence has been acquired through a legal format. Like that, it's just not that there's structures to developing DNA, and like not only at a scene, but you have a suspect and you want to get his saliva sample or a blood sample of that. There's certain mechanisms to do that, like through the arrest and detention format, So what I would say is that I think it's a very strong tool in the and there's less negative about it than there's more positives about it. And as I say, it does show to prove someone's innocence. If if someone is arrested and they're detained and there's DNA at the scene and it's not the person that you've arrested, well, that shows that. So it's not a case of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole,
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in the case you were just talking about, the Ryan case, I believe. The suspect, or one of the suspects, I'm not sure if he was a suspect at the time during the investigation, but you talk about going out and collecting DNA from, I guess, the persons of interest and a whole, I forget how many samples you collected, but he came forward, when he was asked, came forward confidently, thinking that because I forget what the amount of time was, 2 weeks or 12 days or something, had passed. And I guess he, back then even, had already done some preliminary research, right, about DNA evidence, thinking he was safe, right?
Yes, but, that's correct. The suspect in this case, this is where a lady went out on a Christmas party and never returned home. She lived on her own, and her brother sort of became suspicious when she hadn't contacted him the following day, because they were a very close family. We were putting it all together. We followed her, let's say, from her party and tried to reconstruct her movements that night, and we could put her in a fast food restaurant on O'Connell Street in Dublin. We then, the only way home was by taxi or the Nightlink bus. So we tried to trace everybody that was on the Nightlink bus, and eventually we found someone who said that they sat beside her. So then we knew that she had taken the Nightlink bus home, but the Nightlink bus stopped at a certain distance from her house, and she had to she would have had to walk and take a shortcut home through some tunnels and down through let's say, an overgrown valley before she got home. And the suspect, or as part of our investigation, we done what we call door-to-door inquiries, which is common enough with all police forces. And in the area where she got off the bus, and between there and her home, we conducted door-to-door inquiries. And the suspect, when the policeman knocked on his door, he opened it and the policeman said, "Look, we're making inquiries about the lady who was murdered. We found her body and he said, "Yes, it's a shocking thing. Yeah, come on in." And he brought the policeman into the sitting room, and he said to him, do you know anything about it? And he says, I wasn't out that night. He said he was at home. But after that conversation, this man's wife entered the sitting room, and he introduced the policeman to her. Said, "Look, this is the policeman. They're making inquiries about that girl who was killed." "Oh yeah, that was terrible. You were out that night." And he had so she had put him on the spot. So he panicked and he said, "Oh yeah, I was out that night. In actual fact, I walked under the tunnels. I think I seen that woman. She was with somebody," and made up a description of a guy. He was tall, he was blonde hair, this, that, and the other. So by saying this, he was putting himself in a person of interest category, in that he had seen the lady alive a short distance away from where her body was found. And on that basis, we would find it prudent to take a DNA sample from him. But he was very forthcoming in that he was very, very intelligent guy. He was a member of Mensa. He was quite clever, and he had researched semen and how long the semen would last in a body. And we had found the body 16 days after she had gone missing. But he discovered that the semen would only last in the body for 14 days, and that it wouldn't be useful for examination. But what he didn't factor in is that it was at Christmas time, and there was 3 hard nights of frost, which preserved the semen. And on that basis, we were able to get a profile from the semen that was recovered from her body. So we had a we had something to compare the crime scene with. And on that basis, we made up our list of people to put in the person of interest list and to see if they would volunteer a sample. And he volunteered a swab from the mouth, and he said, yeah, he even said, I hope you catch the bastard. And he was thinking that we would not be able to match it up that from his inquiries on the internet. So anyway, the match was made, and he was then obviously the suspect, and he was arrested on suspicion of the murder, and he admitted it relatively straight away because he knew the DNA was, fairly foolproof at that stage. So he admitted that he had been out at a party himself. He went to a certain part of the city to get a prostitute, and even they were busy that night and there was none around. And he ended up walking 5 miles home to his house, and it was lashing rain. So he was, fed up, not satisfied, and he just happened to get walking behind this lady as she had got off the bus because they were both heading in the one direction. Mm-hmm. And he decided then to attack her, which he did. He raped her, and then, according to him, she said to him, "You're from around here, I recognize you." And he said, "I had to kill her then, So he ended up strangling her and leaving her body in the ditch,
just crazy. And this is somebody that had no criminal past, right?
This man had no criminal past whatsoever. He was married. He had a child. He was, that was it. He was, he worked in a company that he was highly respected. He was very well educated, and he didn't commit to our notice for anything ever. But what made him do this was just a spur of the moment, desire, and that's exactly what he did. It's a psychopathic sort of tendencies, because when he was arrested and he made his admissions and that, he showed very little remorse. And that's something I noticed over the years from dealing with murderers, like our psychopathic people. They have very little emotional attachment to what they have done, And he was just another one of them, and he pleaded guilty and got life imprisonment, and he's still locked up at the moment,
Wow. But one of the interesting things you talk about in the book, and I'd never thought about this before, but it does make sense, is as you're investigating these cases, you talk about the murder victim in the case, sort of getting to know them so well that you almost feel like a connection or a friendship with them. And they almost come alive, their life, because you get to know their life so well. Can you elaborate on that phenomenon?
Yes, it's always been my state of mind, is that when you go to a murder scene and you're looking someone there who's been shot or stabbed or beaten to death, like, they hold all the answers to what you want to find out. They are someone who has been snatched or taken from life, taken from this earth, without their consent. Like, they have been just taken, their life has been taken. And as a policeman, you owe a duty of care to that person and their family. So, like, they're looking on you to provide the answers. And I always find it that you have to look into that person's past. You have to look into their friends, their everything, to find out about them, maybe sometimes to get a lead. And you learn so much about them and from their families that you believe that you would know that person. If they came back the following day, you'd know everything about them. You'd be able to strike up a conversation with them, So these are people who have been taken that shouldn't have been taken. And it's up to the police man, the senior investigating officer, to do a professional job to be able to find out the truth of what happened to this person. And the families of these deceased, like, all they ever want to know is, number one, who killed their loved one, why they killed their loved one, and will justice be served? And they're the three things that families really want to know. And if you can deliver the answers to the families, they will be very happy, and they will be, you've done a good job. And obviously there's, a murder investigation just doesn't stop at just catching the killer. You have to go through a whole court process, and there's a whole administrative end of that, like where you have to disclose documents and you have to present the case, and that everything has been done right. And so, like, there's a lot of work in a murder investigation. I don't think people realize the amount of work that goes into it, especially here in Ireland, where we have to disclose all the elements of the investigation to the defence before the case, and they do not have to disclose anything to us about how they're going to defend their client or anything like that. So, we're off to not a bad start, but that's an aspect here I don't think you have over there. And I think over there you have, let's say, here, if you get convicted of murder, it's life imprisonment. But life imprisonment here can serve a sentence between 18 and 23 years. Where in America it's life is life, and rightly so, or the death penalty. Now, I wouldn't be in favour of the death penalty, but I certainly would be in favour of someone who pre-plans a murder and is caught. They should serve the rest of their life in prison as a punishment for what they've done,
Yeah. So one thing you talk about in the book is, and when I first read it, it kind of took me back for a minute. You talk about the gut instinct. I think, I can't remember which case you were talking about. I think it was maybe the Joe O'Reilly case, where you were talking about you just kind of knew that that this guy was guilty. And I'm curious, how do you weigh or how do you use that gut instinct and maybe not let it get you off path and still follow the track of the evidence, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, Joe O'Reilly was a very famous case here in Ireland, and was one of the most notorious crimes in the last 50 years, because it's where his wife, Rachel, was found battered to death in her home, and how the alarm was raised that she did not collect her children from the creche. And Joe was informed that Rachel, his wife, hadn't collected the children, and he then contacted Rachel's mother, who came out to the house and discovered Rachel's body in the house. Now, Joe alleged that he was working all morning and he was in Dublin City, and that's where he was. Now, when we looked into it, we discovered that Joe hadn't been in work, and no one had seen him in where he said he was. And in respect of this particular case, how it became so famous is that, apart from Joe's demeanour and his arrogance to proclaim his innocence, we had his mobile phone, and for the first time in Irish case, we were able to triangulate his calls during the morning, and we were able to do what we call cell site analysis, which we were able to show, obviously, that when he received calls, they went through certain masts, and we were able to track his movements from where he said he was that morning out to the area where he lived in the country and near the scene of the crime. Now, we also discovered that his marriage was in a very poor state. He told us different, and we discovered then he was having an affair, and the affair was so advanced that we found emails on his computer indicating he was wanting to leave Rachel and take up with this other lady and be with her and his two children. So what Joe was telling us was far from what we were finding out. He became a suspect, and eventually he was charged with the murder. And after a very lengthy trial, he was convicted. He still protested his innocence, and still does to this day, even though he received a life sentence. So it was a very famous case for the simple reason that the technology that his phone possessed was evidential and was his ultimate downfall,
It's amazing when, like, the Joe O'Reilly case, and there was another case that I'm forgetting which one, where it was like the same circumstance, where the man murders his wife, and It was the one where he tried to the murderer tried to set it up as his wife fell down the steps. And
Yes,
they try to set it up this way, and they have another relationship with a woman going on. It's that psychotic mentality. They think they can do absolutely anything.
Yes, definitely a psychopathic man was Colin Wheeler, and the circumstance of this is where he called 999 and said his wife had fallen down the stairs, and they put him onto the ambulance personnel, who told him to try to give her first aid, and he was saying there was no movement out of her, and that look, she appeared to be dead. The ambulance arrived, and they found that she was very cold, but she was wrapped in a duvet. And he alleged to us that she had fallen down the stairs. There was only the two of them in the house, and that was it. But when the post-mortem revealed that she had been strangled, and by way of ligature, even though there was no mark of a ligature on her. Sort of also on Colin Whelan, when he was in the hospital, one of the nurses noticed down his shirt that there was a scrape mark, and she said to him, "You should get yourself checked out. You've had an awful fright." And he said, "Okay." So when he took off his shirt, there was a big, huge scrape mark down his chest, and then the police were called. We preserved the scene, and he appeared to be a very genuine type of guy on first appearances and first interview. And after the post-mortem, we then launched a murder investigation. We preserved the scene, and we did find it in the house. The scene of the crime was outside the ensuite door in the master bedroom where she had been strangled. We found the ligature was actually the rope from his nightgown, and he had wrapped it around a towel to strangle his wife, and then he killed her upstairs and then dragged her body downstairs to make it look like a fall. Now, the post-mortem also revealed that there was no injuries consistent with a fall down the stairs. And in actual fact, the back of her buttocks, there were burn marks, which would indicate that she was dragged down the stairs. Now, the reason being that he did this was, number one, he had taken out a policy for £400,000 on his wife. Initially 200 before he got married, and then when they got married, he upped to another 200,000, and he was going to cash in on a policy for £400,000. Now, this guy was a computer programmer, and he was well up on computers, but he was having, what we discovered when we looked at his computers, he was having a cyber affair with a girl in Wales that he had. It's hard to believe that he fell in love, and he said he never loved her, but she fell in love with him. I went to Wales and spoke with her, and she said that she was in love with this guy she met online, and his name was Colin Whelan, and we showed her a picture, and she says, "That's him." And we told her that his wife had died, and we were breaking the news gently to her, and she said, "I know, she was killed in a car crash." Now, Colin Whelan had been involved in a car crash years earlier where a woman was killed, but he was using that scenario to say that this is how his wife was killed to this girl in Wales. And we said, no, his wife was killed only recently. She had been strangled to death. And we believe Colin is the culprit. Now, the poor lady took an awful fright, but she said she wanted to cooperate with us 100%. And she said she had quite a lot of material from the computer that Colin was sending her greeting cards and emails and this, that and the other. And that's what was done. We spent 12 hours there downloading her computer, and we spent 12 hours taking a statement from her in respect of her involvement with Colin Whelan. Now, it's hard to believe that she never met him in a physical format, but she was totally in love with him and was looking forward to meeting him. And
especially back then. I mean, today it might be more common for that, but yeah.
Yeah. And also in respect of what we found on his computer, which was amazing. And this is what was we found obviously the insurance policy on his computer, which showed the motive. And we also showed that he had been planning to kill her even before he married her, and he had looked up sites on asphyxiation and rendering unconscious and all of those type of sites. And he had looked up a guy from North Carolina, Henry Louis Wallace, who was convicted of 9 murders of women, and where he used certain ligatures and didn't leave a mark, and he used a towel and that. And Colin Whelan's modus operandi was exactly the same as Henry Louis Wallace. So we were able to. He was hell bent on killing his wife, for this money. God. But he had played a blinder, because he had, let's say, he killed her in March, but at Christmas time, he had bought her so many presents and left them under the Christmas tree and wouldn't let her wrap them up or anything. And when people would visit the house, they'd say, "Look at all the presents." And his wife would say, "Oh yeah, Colin bought them for me." Like he was playing her. He was the perfect husband. He'd send her flowers to her workplace every week. And the girls at work would say, "You really got a good man there," Little did they think that he was going to end up killing her,
sick. Yeah.
Sick, yeah. But on the day he killed her at work, he went into a local store and bought her a present and paid by credit card, and made sure he was seen under the cameras, and engaged the cashier in a conversation to tell him that he loved his wife and he was buying her a present to surprise her and this, that, and the other, So one of the first things that when we suspected him, we said, tell us the truth. And he said, "Why would I kill my wife? Sure, didn't I buy her a present that day?" So he was playing the game. He was playing the game. He was very, very clever in ways, but stupid in other ways. Now he was. We eventually charged him with the murder, and he was on bail. And then he staged his own disappearance. We believed his car was found abandoned at a spot in a place called Howth in Dublin, where people normally have taken their lives, jumped off the cliffs there. But I knew this guy. I knew him. He was so. If you ever see that film "Living with the Enemy," it's exactly. He would have everything spick and span in the house. If you opened the press, you'd have all the tins in the one place. You'd have everything was just spick and span, And the way he parked his car in this particular car park would indicate that it wasn't parked in a manner by someone who was deranged and wanted to kill themselves. So I always believed, and I knew myself in my heart and soul, and it's that he was alive. But where was he and where he had gone? But some 14 months later, we discovered by a guy who knew him from school, had visited a bar in Mallorca and seen him working behind the bar, and eventually told us, and we got the Guardia Civil to check it out, and he was there. So we put in place the European arrest warrant, which we did, and we took him back. Now, he pleaded guilty to the murder, and he's still in prison serving his time. That was in 2004. So he was something else. He was the ultimate psychopath, had it all planned out. And one of the aspects that what I did initially was, he said he was the only person in the house with his wife, and he heard her falling down the stairs and she was dead. And that was it. And I checked out the alarm system, which he had. And the log from the alarm would showed, even though the alarm was turned off, it still was sending pulses to the contacts on the doors and windows, that no one had entered the house or left the house or interfered with it in any way. So we were able to put him in the house with his wife, and the postmortem said she was strangled. So it put him in the suspect bracket straight away. And, from our analysis of the computers and the finding of his insurance policy and that, we discovered that, we had a motive, and he had pre-planned the murder, even going back to 6 months before he got married, looking up sites. So he he had this idea to kill his wife that he had been dating for 10 years. So, it's hard to fathom out, but it's the story is there in the book, So,
yeah. And the book is full of stories like this. And if someone out there, if listeners out there are into these true crime stories, I mean, this is the book for you. It's a fascinating read. And Patrick, like I said at the top of the show, you do a fantastic job storytelling, just like you're doing right now on this show.
Yeah. Well, look, there's some good stories there, and the other one of the other murders that I mentioned is Jacqueline McDonough, who was beaten to death in her house by her husband, who, in front of the children, and he beat her so bad, and then got a garden shears and stuck it in her head, and she died. And he alleged then and got one of his children to ring the police and say that someone had broke into the house and attacked the mother, and he played dumb all along. And then we were able to put it together, but he surprised us by coming to the police station with his solicitor and alleging that his wife had attacked him with a knife and he wanted to defend himself, and he hit her once. And then he became, he remembers being floating out of his body, and he was sort of in a different place. So this guy was a bodybuilder, and what we call, you don't have it over there, bare knuckle fighter. And he was built very, very strong build, and he took a lot of steroids. But it was true, let's say, and I mentioned it in the book. I was out with some friends one night, and they were asking me about the murder, and I don't talk about it. I just said, look, I just don't reveal or say anything to my friends or that. And one of them said, God, he's a big bodybuilder. I'm sure he's using the steroids as an excuse for killing her. And I didn't know really what he meant, but I took in what he was saying. And I did ask the pathologist when I spoke to them. They said, yeah, there's a thing in America called roid rage. And it's where people who have taken steroids and they have successfully defended their case and been acquitted on the basis that the effects of steroids was the reason why they killed whoever they did. They get into a rage and it affects their mental state. So I believed then, I twigged, I said, God, this is what this fella's at like, he's going to use this as a defense. And I went about looking at his blood samples that we took off him, and it was the sample of blood we took from him was 52 hours after the murder. So I had that blood analysed to see was there any foreign hormones in it, and there was. And I had to send a sample to France because the Irish state lab hadn't the facility to check for steroids. And we discovered there was one foreign steroid in his body that he would have had to have administered by injection at some stage.
Right.
So I got a guy eventually in England. He was Dr. David Cowan. He's a professor, and he was the top man in analysing steroids. And he's used in the Olympic Committee for doping and that. And that's what I remembered at the time. It was the Olympics were on that summer, and he was used as the top man. Now, I contacted him, and he was saying, yes, I can help you out. And I said, this steroid, I want to know about it. And I want to know, can you calculate back the 52 hours to tell me what quantity would have been in this man's body at the time of the murder, and would it have had any effect on his mental state? And he was able to do that and provided me with a report to say that the steroid in his body was quite low, and he calculated it back and said that the steroid amount in this man's body at the time of killing his wife was so low, it wouldn't have any effect on his mental state or reasoning whatsoever. So I was able to knock his defence out of the park before the trial ever started. So on that basis, he had nowhere to go, and he pleaded guilty to the murder then, And he's still in doing life. He's in locked up as well, But it was the type of thinking you have to engage in to sort of outsmart the criminal, You
have to be one step ahead too, like there with the defense team, not knowing the defense they would bring, but getting a hint of it.
Yes, absolutely. And I was always proud of that one because that girl's parents were always very appreciative of the police and how they investigated it and how they got the husband locked up, and that was, but look, there's another one there. I speak about Niall Dore, and he was a young chap who was beaten to death in the street in the city. I was a detective inspector in Dundalk, and it was only a little piece of DNA that solved it, but their family really appreciated the fact that we got someone and we were able to lock them up. And they said to me after the trial, after the guy pleaded guilty, they came over and they said, "Thank you very much." And the mother gave me a hug and she says, only for you. We wouldn't know where to go or turn, and I feel that that's a good testament and that the job was well done, and that the Garda Síochána provided the answers and did their job well, and that's all we're there. We're public servants, and that's it,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there, and maybe a good point to end on. I don't know what the mentality or the attitude towards policing is right now in Ireland, but in the U.S., for good reason, there's been, I don't know, you've probably seen the headlines, there's been a lot of police violence against innocent people who have been killed in the United States. And it's great to see a book like this, with you sharing these stories from your long career as a detective of, I call it old-fashioned police work, but actually, like you said, serving the people, serving the victims' families, and bringing the suspect, bringing the perpetrator to justice. So very, very refreshing to see this today.
Yeah. Well, listen, John, I appreciate that. But it is the book is a genuine reflection of how I dealt with these cases. And, when I retired, the letters I received from the families were very heartwarming. People who wished me the best and thanked me again so much for my dedication and how I provided the answers for them and what they felt about me. And when I launched my book there on the 1st of September, they all 1st of October, they all turned up at my launch and were very, very supportive of the book and very supportive of me. So I think that's a very good testament to, let's say, going right round the circle, and it meant a lot to me, but I got a lovely email from a serving member of the police who said to me that, "Look, Pat, I hear you're retiring. You're going to be a big loss to the police force. You're well known and you've done a marvellous job, and you can leave the job with your head held high. You can look yourself in the mirror every morning and knowing that you were done a fantastic job, because there's a lot of people way higher ranked than you can't look themselves in the mirror in the morning." So he said, "Look, but be very proud of what you've done." And in all fairness, since I wrote the book, I've had nothing but positive comments, and I'm really sort of maybe realizing now that I made a bigger impact than I had thought all along, but no, the book is it captures a lot of stories and a lot of what I believed in, being professional. Like I always told my teams, you have to be honest, accountable, respectful, responsible, and professional. And when it comes to evidence and that, collecting evidence, make things as simple as possible. You have to portray and represent what evidence you have in a very logical manner, so people will understand it, not only our prosecution service, but also a jury, So there were my guidelines, and they worked for me. And, that's all I can say, and I appreciate the time, John, you've given me to explain some of the book.
Appreciate your time, being so generous with your time. The book is called The Making of a Detective, a Garda story of investigating some of Ireland's most notorious crimes. I know it's on Amazon because that's where I bought it on my Kindle on Amazon. I'm sure it's available. Is it available in bookstores across the U.S. probably?
Yeah, but you'll definitely get it on Amazon. Like, definitely you get it on Amazon. And what I would say as well, just to round it off there, my colleague was shot dead in January 2013. He was one of my detectives, and he was doing a cash escort, and he was ambushed and shot in the head and died instantly. And it took us 5 years to I was investigating. It took me 5 years to get someone before the courts. And I must say I've had tremendous help from Homeland Security, who I work closely with. And we went to America to glean some evidence in that. And I must say, they really, really impressed me. Very, very professional guys that I worked with from Homeland Security, very dedicated, and they looked on the death of my colleague as the death of one of theirs. So that's how close we were and how close we sort of engaged in trying to glean evidence in America, which we did. And I must say, I have the height of respect for the guys I worked with over there, like really, really good, and we would not have solved the crime without their cooperation. So I'd just like to mention that,
Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear about the death of your colleague.
Mm-hmm.
But glad you were able to bring the perpetrator to justice.
I really appreciate your time, John, to get my story out there. And if anyone wanted to, come back or find out any more, interesting points about the book, mm-hmm. or certainly contact me, or I can, I'm available to speak with anyone. There's no problem.
All right. Thank you, Pat.
Okay, John. Listen, thanks very much, John. Have a good day. Thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview today with Patrick Mary. I haven't done a lot of shows like this. I've only done a handful where I'm bringing on people that are former detectives who are taking you on the crime scene and detailing, some really brutal crimes. And it's not something I get into a lot. It is very popular. The true crime shows, people love hearing about this stuff, and I can see why, because it is truly fascinating. I'm retracing the steps and figuring out what exactly happened and getting inside the mind of a killer. With that being said, I did mention to Patrick that, I've just recently I had a show here, episode 200, where I had Pete Quinones and Rayford Davis on, our cop roundtable, where we talked about policing gone wrong in the United States. And it is important, and I think it's important to mention, bringing on someone like Patrick, who highlights how policing can be done right to serve the public, to help to find psychotic people who have murdered other people and get them off the streets. So that, my friends, is what, in my mind, what policing should be. Policing should not be harassing the public and doing other horrible things like shooting innocent people through windows. Policing should be, when a crime occurs, getting to the truth of what happened. At the end of the day, the courts will serve justice. So I, of course, will link to Patrick's book on the show notes page. I picked it up on Kindle on Amazon, but I'm also getting a signed copy, which I'm excited about. And you can do the same. The show notes page, of course, is lionsofliberty.com/FF202. I said you could do the same by buying it on a Kindle or buying a physical copy. I don't know if you can get a signed copy or not. Probably not. But go ahead, do that, check it out, and I don't have much else to say, or I have nothing else to say. I hope everyone has a great weekend. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.